Hi, welcome to the session by RouteFabric, and in today's session we're going to be covering looping in Java. Alright, so the plan for today is, first we're going to discuss what looping in programming is in a more general sense, and then we're going to go over some real-world examples to kind of get an idea for how looping works, and then we're going to talk about the different loops available in Java, and we're going to implement some loops in our code. Alright, so what is looping? So in programming, loops are a structure we can write that allows us to execute code repeatedly. So this is extremely useful and essential to programming because not only does it allow us to save space to write a loop, we don't have to copy and paste the same code over and over, but loops can be written to run conditionally. And as such, the amount of times our loops can run changes depending on data and other factors. So we can have a loop run for as long as there's still items left in the list, or we can have a loop run while some condition is still not met, that kind of thing. So there are three basic loops that we need to understand. There's the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. All right, so the first one we're going to go over is the for loop. So a for loop will run for a certain amount of times, performing some operation after each loop, ideally until the conditions of the loop are no longer met and the loop ends. So that might sound pretty confusing, but we'll show an example and it'll become more clear. So these are ideal if we know how many times we want our loop to run. So if you have a scenario and you know that you want your loop to run 10 times, then a for loop is a great way to do this. Or you know that you want your loop to run, as long as a list is, this is another good scenario to use this kind of loop. But this would not be a good loop if we say want our loop to run for as long as it needs to until the user enters in a specific value or that kind of thing. It wouldn't be a good loop for that. So a for loop is made up of three statements. So an initialization statement in which we set the value of the variable, and then a condition for looping statement. So this is where we're going to say basically the loop is going to run as long as this condition is met, and as soon as the condition is not met, the loop is not going to run. So then an execution statement after each loop. So after each loop in a for loop, we're going to want to do something to our value. So ideally, we would have some initial value that we set in the initialization statement. And then after each loop, we can say increment that value, or we can decrement that value, or we can do something to that value so that we're closer to getting out of the for loop. So we can run the for loop a certain amount of times. All right, and then we also have while loops and do while loops. So right off the bat, while and do while loops are actually very similar. So these loops will run indefinitely until the condition for looping is not met. So these are ideal when we do not know how many times we want to loop. So let's say we need to loop over a list once, then we would want to use a for loop. But let's say we want to loop forever until the user enters in a certain value, then we would need a do while loop or a while loop. So I'll just touch on the differences between a while and a do while loop. So a while loop is not guaranteed to run. So what I mean by this is if the condition for looping is not met before the code gets to the loop, then the loop will never execute. So let's say you're doing a while loop based on user input. So you're saying while user input does not equal exit or something. Well, let's say you already set the value to exit before that somewhere else in your code, then that while loop is never going to run because the initial condition isn't met, so it's not going to run, not even once. Meanwhile, a do while loop is guaranteed to run at least once. So when we do a do while loop, what we're saying is do this while this condition is met. So the condition part actually goes after the do part. So basically what that means is that the do part, whatever is within the loop, is going to execute at least once every time. All right, so when do we need to loop? So here's just a few real world examples. So we'll say like for each dish in the sink, we need to wash each one until there are no more dishes left. So this would be a great representation for a for loop. So we could do like the initialization statement could be like number of dishes washed equals 0. And then we could do while number of dishes washed is less than or equal to total dirty dishes. And then we'll say for the execution after each loop, we'll say number of dishes washed plus plus, or we'll increment the number of dishes washed and then within our loop ourselves, we'll say wash the dish. All right, another example of a loop in real life would be like, while the living room is still messy, we will be cleaning it up. So here we would want to use a while loop because we don't necessarily know how long it's going to take to clean the living room. So we're going to continue to clean the living room until it's clean. So we don't know if that's going to take 10 minutes or 1 hour, or maybe one time it'll only take 10 minutes because the living room is not that dirty. But then the next time it'll take 3 hours because the living room is a complete mess. So here we would need a while loop because we're going to want to continue to do our execution until the living room is no longer messy. All right, and then our next example is, while there are emails in my inbox, I need to check my emails. So this would be where a do while loop will take place. And the reason we would want to use a do while loop here is because in order to see if there are emails in the inbox, we must first check the emails at least once. So we want the execution part, the checking the emails part, we want that to execute at least once because we need to check the emails first to decide if there's still emails in the inbox. So here we're going to want a do while loop because we're going to say, okay, check the emails while there are still emails in the inbox, but we're going to need to check the emails at least once. All right, so loops in Java. So a for loop in Java is written as following. So we say for and then parentheses, and we do initial statement, semicolon, conditional statement, semicolon, execution after each loop, and then of course we have our curly braces with our code. So what we're saying here is for, and we're setting some variable to an initial value, and we're saying this is the conditional, so until this conditional is no longer met, and then after each loop, do some execution. So do something, usually this is going to be to our initial variable. We're going to do something to our initial variable we set over here. Not always, you can put really anything in here. And then we're going to do our code within these curly braces. So a while loop is written as while, and then some conditional statement in here. And then we're going to execute the code within the curly braces. We can do here while number of dishes washed is going to be, less than 10 or whatever. We can put anything in here, any conditional statement that can be evaluated to a Boolean value. And then for our do while loop, it's very similar to a while loop. So we have do first. Remember I said we're always going to execute the code that's within the do while loop at least once. So we're going to say do, and then we're going to have our parentheses with our code, and then while, our conditional statement is going to come after that. So just a quick little note here. We should always work towards making a loop condition no longer met. Otherwise, our loops could run indefinitely. So we need to make sure whenever we're constructing our loops that we construct them in an insightful manner, and we make sure that we set our loop so that we can't have an infinite loop. So for example, let's say we're doing a while loop and it's based on some value, and that value, let's say, so while value is greater than 10 or something like that. And let's say that condition never gets met. Even if we're incrementing the value within our while loop or decrementing the value within our while loop, it's still possible that that condition will never be met. So we need to make sure that when we're writing a do while loop or a while loop or even a for loop, that we will eventually break the conditional statement and we will get out of the loop. And this is ideally the way you want to get out of loops. There are other ways to get out of loops. For example, you can literally type in break and you will break out of the loop you're currently in. But ideally, you want to make sure you set your condition for looping to actually be to actually correspond to what you want your loop to do. So you don't want to just set some random condition in there. I've seen, especially people who are new to programming, they'll do something like while, and then they'll just put true within the parentheses, and then somewhere in the while loop, they'll put a break. So this is a pretty poor looping structure, and this can definitely lead to like infinite loops or stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you're actually setting your looping statement, your conditional statement, to actually be logical and focus on what the loop is actually doing. Sometimes it's okay to use things like break, go to, or continue. Those are okay to use sometimes, but definitely don't rely on those and don't make those a crutch for if you have a broken loop. You want to make sure you actually make your loop make sense. All right, so let's go ahead and make a quick little program. So what we'll be doing is we will be writing a simple password protection program. So for this, we'll be implementing both while loops and for loops. So basically, what's going on here is we're going to prompt the user to enter in a password, and we're going to prompt them continuously, so we're always going to be prompting them. And then while the password is incorrect, the program will continue to run. So while they're typing in passwords and it's wrong, the program's going to run. So this kind of mimics, password protection you'll find online. For example, let's say you're trying to log into your Google account or something. It's going to continue to prompt you for the password until you get it right, or it locks you out of your account in a lot of cases. But it won't let you get to your account if the password is wrong. So you're only going to break out of the loop when you have the right password. And we will also, just to make this a little bit more interesting and not so simple, we will be doing a list of acceptable passwords. So there won't just be one password that's correct. We'll do a few different passwords, and we'll just do this so we can use a for loop to check the passwords to include a little bit of complexity in our program. All right, so let's just open up our Eclipse workspace, and then we're just gonna create a new class in our project, and we'll just call this password. And then everything else is fine. And of course, we want this to be executable. So we need to make sure we do a main method. So we'll do public static void main. All right. Perfect. And then since we're going to be getting user input, we also need to include scanner here. So we'll just do import java.util.scanner. Perfect. That should be everything we need to make this program. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to create a scanner object so we can get inputs. And I'll just call this something really simple. So we'll do scanner in, and we'll call this new scanner system.in. Perfect. All right, and now we should initialize our array of passwords. So we can use here either an array, or we could use some other data structure, whatever we wanted. I'm actually going to use an array list, just because those are a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to import java.util.array list. Perfect. So we'll create a new array list, and we're going to call it array list substring, and we'll call this passwords equals new array list, and of course we'll do string again, then our parentheses. Perfect. So what we're saying here is we're creating a scanner that's going to scan from the system inputs. We're also going to create an array list, which is kind of like an array. They're similar. This one just grows dynamically. And we're going to call it passwords, and it's going to store strings. So our passwords are going to be strings, obviously, because when you type in a password, you can have, characters and numbers, that kind of thing. You can have anything in them. So we're going to represent passwords with a string type. That'll make the most sense. All right, so we're just going to add some passwords to our string. So we'll do passwords dot add, and then we'll put in, we can add the password as password, as a very secure password. And we can add another one, passwords dot add. Then we'll say something like, we can do pass maybe, whatever we want our passwords to be, and then we'll add one more password. So passwords add, and then we'll add, maybe we'll do something like this, something. Perfect. All right, so we have some passwords in our array list. All right, now we need to prompt the user. I'll write this down. We need to prompt the user to enter a password, but we need to keep prompting them. So this is where the looping part actually comes into play. So if we want to prompt the user and we want to continuously prompt them, this would be a great candidate for a while loop or a do while loop, because we don't know how many times the user is going to attempt to enter in a password. So, maybe they'll get it right on the first time, or maybe it'll take them, 10 times, maybe it'll take them 100 times. So we don't know how long this loop needs to run. So that's why we're going to need to use a while loop here. And we want the while loop to be based on the actual inputs the user is giving. So we'll do a string, and we'll call this response. All right. And we'll just, we won't initialize it to anything right now. And since we want our while loop to be based on the user response, we could do a regular while loop where we do like while response, isn't equal to this other thing. But since we didn't initialize response yet, because we haven't gotten any user input, so it doesn't make sense to initialize it yet, this would actually be a pretty good candidate for a do while loop. So we're going to prompt the user for input at least once, right? You're not going to want your program to run and do nothing, so you want to prompt them at least once. So we're just going to do a do while loop here. And then for our condition here, for our while condition, we're going to say while response dot content equals, and then we're going to do while not response dot content equals, and here we'll put in exit, and we'll do or not found password. So we haven't declared found password yet, so we'll just declare a boolean found password. So we'll do boolean, we'll do found password equals false. All right. So you see we'll get an error here because we didn't initialize response, but we're going to do that in our do part of our while loops. This is why I said we should probably make this a do while loop and not a while loop. All right. So we have a boolean for found password. So whenever we find the password in our passwords array list, we're going to set that to true, and that's going to be our condition for our while loop. So we see here we have two conditions. So we're going to do while response dot content equals exit. So we're basically saying while the user isn't typing exit, so if they type exit, this will break the program. So we have two conditions here really, or found password, or we haven't found the password basically. So while we haven't found the password and the user doesn't want to exit, then we're going to keep looping. So if we type in exit, it's going to exit, or if we find the password, it's going to exit the loop. Either one will exit the loop. So we'll do response, or we should actually type in some prompt first, system.out.print, and we're going to say, please enter in the password. Perfect. And we'll do response equals in dot next, and we'll do line here. So we do next line. This is just going to get an entire line, so if they do a password with spaces in it or something like that, it'll still work, instead of doing just next, which will just get the next string, not necessarily the next whole entire line. All right, perfect. So we've already got the main looping structure kind of down here. So we have a do while loop that's going to loop until we find a password or the user wants to exit. So now we need to see if they actually found the password. So we're going to need a for loop to go over our passwords, which is an array list, and we're going to look at each individual password in our list, and we're going to say, okay, is this equal to the password that they said? If it is, then true. So basically, we're going to see, and it only has to be equivalent to one of these passwords. So in our example, we set up multiple passwords that are all valid. The user only has to get one of them. So if they guess one of them, then it'll go through. Basically, it'll say, access granted or whatever. So we're going to do a for loop. So we'll do for, and then remember, we need some initial conditions. So you can actually declare variables in here. So I'm just going to do int I equals 0. You'll see I used a lot for loops. It's just kind of convention to use a integer variable named I for a for loop. It keeps it nice and clean, and usually everyone knows what you're talking about. And then our condition for looping is I is going to be less than passwords.size. So passwords.size is going to return the size of our array list. So while I is still going to be less than passwords.size, and we're going to do I++ for our condition. For our execution, we're going to do after each loop, we're going to increment I. So each time I is getting incremented until I is no longer less than passwords.size. And once that condition is broken, then this for loop will end. All right, so then we'll just set up braces for this for loop. So then we're going to check each password, so we can do an if statement for that. So we'll do if, and we'll do, passwords.get, and we'll put in I here. I. So we'll say if passwords.get I equals is equivalent to, I should say, and we'll do response, and we'll set found password to true. All right, so we're going to loop through, and we're going to loop through each password in our array list, and we're going to say, okay, if the password at that specific point in the array list is the same thing as the response, if they're the same exact password, then we're going to say we found the password, and this is a valid password. Let's get rid of our empty space here, and perfect. This is going to execute. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a do while loop, and we're going to keep running until response is not exit, or I'm sorry, until response is exit, then we're going to break, or if they found the password, we're going to break. So we have just went through our loop, and they either found the password or they typed in exit. So we'll say if found password, we're going to print out system.out.println. I'll put something like access granted, or whatever we want to put here. And we can do an else statement. So else, so we know this else statement is going to be we know this else statement is going to be that the response equals exit, because that was the condition for our while loop. So we know that that has to be the other condition that was met here if it's not found password. So we'll do system.out.println, and we'll put program exiting. All right. We'll actually do this too. We'll put this up here as well. Perfect. All right, so if we run this program, we should expect the, sorry, we actually need to close the scanner as well before I forget. We'll do in.close so we can get rid of that warning. So what we should expect from this program is we should be prompted for a password, and then we will continue to be prompted for a password until we get the right password or we type in exit. So we should add something else here too, so the user knows if they enter in the wrong password. So we'll do if, and we'll do not found password here, and we'll do system.out.println, and we'll do incorrect password. We should actually do two conditions for this if statement. So if not found password, and response.content equals exit, and we need a not here as well, a logical not. So what we're saying here is if they didn't find the password and they didn't type in exit, we're going to say incorrect password, because that makes sense. If they didn't find the password and they didn't type in exit, then they typed in a wrong password. All right, sorry about that, just a few oversights here. Whenever we do in.next line, it will actually leave a new line character in the stream. So basically what that means is that we would have because when we type in something in the input, we then press enter, so that leaves a new line for us. So the way we can get around that is we can do .next just to get the next string, which is just what I did here, a simple fix. Or you could also, get rid of the new line character, or you can include the new line character in your content equals. And also here, I just changed this just to make a little bit more sense. I changed this to a content equals condition as well. So now if we try this again and we type in something like 1, 2, 3, you'll see that I'll say incorrect password. If we were to type in exit, that'll exit the program. Now if you were to type in a password that was actually in the list, like say password, then you'll see it'll say access granted, and the program will exit. So in this session, we went over for loops, while loops, and do while loops, and we created a simple password program. I hope this session was informative. If you would like to learn more about looping in Java, check out our sessions at RouteFabric.com. Thank you.